Hello and welcome to World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. My name is Ashim Kumar. The United States Supreme Court has struck down some of Donald Trump's most sweeping global tariffs, upending one of the White House's top policy priorities and injecting new uncertainty into global trade. In a first response, the US president announced an additional 10% tariff. More on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. Boosting joint military drone capabilities as an effective alternative to land-based air defence systems at Europe's Defence Summit in Krakow. Ambitious plans to modernise Polish airports and create a new communication hub will be funded by loans from 3 Polish banks. A landmark trial examines social media addiction claims. Can platforms be held responsible for harming children? The US Supreme Court ruled on Friday that President Trump had overstepped his authority when he ordered tariffs on imports from almost every country. The White House had no immediate comment on the ruling, but Trump called it a, quote, disgrace.
We're going to be taking in next year $900 billion in tariffs, unless the Supreme Court said you can't do it. Can you believe it?
Unless the Supreme Court says you can't do it, which is exactly what happened on Friday in a stinging blow to U.S. President Donald Trump's economic agenda. In a 6-3 decision with 3 conservative justices in the majority camp, the court ruled that a 1977 law known as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act did not authorize the president to push through tariffs without the approval of Congress.
Well, the Supreme Court, as I understand the decision, is about the presidential powers vis-a-vis the congressional powers. And it says, the president of the United States went beyond the powers he actually has.
The ruling targeted 2 categories of tariffs, the so-called reciprocal tariffs imposed last April, which vary by country, along with the 25% standalone tariff imposed on China, Canada, and Mexico. But not all of Trump's tariffs were affected by the ruling, particularly those on automobiles, steel, and aluminum. Nonetheless, it's a painful blow to Donald Trump, who has argued that tariffs will help revive U.S. manufacturing and lower the trade deficit. Along with eliminating many of the tariffs, the Supreme Court's decision could put more pressure on an already struggling U.S. dollar.
In the short run, we will observe the drop of the exchange rate of the dollar against major world currencies, and that is to some extent a good news for the U.S. manufacturers.
It could also lift stock markets around the world, which have been rattled by tariffs in the past on more than one occasion.
The markets are breathing a sigh of relief for now. The question, of course, is how the markets will react as events unfold. Will Donald Trump comply and repay the tariffs plus interest, or will he find new ways to generate the necessary revenue? For now, it is a defeat.
Regardless of the Trump administration's next moves, today's decision is a major setback for the White House. For TVP World, I'm Maciej Wilowski.
Iran has 10 to 15 days to strike a deal with the US, or else. President Trump's stark warning is raising tensions, including in Europe. Polish authorities again advise against travel to Iran, while Kazimierz Wyszak reports on the growing risk of the conflict spreading across the Middle East.
Big questions are still hanging over Iran. The first one being, will the United States launch an attack? President Donald Trump is again threatening military action if Iran doesn't make a deal in 10 to 15 days.
I would think that would be enough time, 10, 15 days, pretty much maximum.
Polish authorities are now again repeating their warnings about traveling to Iran, after Prime Minister Donald Tusk hinted at the potential conflict breaking out earlier this week. TVP World has asked the Polish foreign minister to clarify the danger.
It's not just the threat of possible military action, it's also a country that takes hostages. There was literally a sentence in the last few days of a British couple who were going around the world on motorcycles, and they were accused of espionage. And so when we warn people not to go somewhere, please take it seriously.
While the regime of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is brutally repressing its citizens, the United States has amassed an armada of ships nearby, including 2 aircraft carriers. And yet a strike is not certain. The biggest threat would be the conflict boiling over into the entire region.
What happens if Iran retaliates and blockades the Strait of Hormuz? This would mean that, more generally, Israel would join. It would also mean potentially a proxy firestorm.
In case of a US attack, the Islamic Republic could count on the support of the Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon and the Houthi rebels in Yemen. The US would be backed by Israel. America also has military bases in other countries in the region, which Iran considers fair game.
So Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, etc. So this then would also mean something different for Europeans. How do we react? How do we respond to that? Do we support the US?
Poland doesn't have a big military presence in the Middle East, just a handful of officers on NATO missions in select countries like Iraq. It's unlikely Warsaw would commit any additional troops to the region, as it's occupied with securing its borders with Russia and Ukraine. For TVP World, Kazimierz Łysiak.
The EU's Foreign Affairs Council is set to meet on Monday amid rising tensions over Iran, ongoing support for Ukraine and engagement with Trump's Board of Peace, with sanctions and funding top of the agenda.
The EU's Foreign Affairs Council is set to meet on Monday to discuss the most pressing geopolitical issues currently facing the bloc. This includes the ongoing tensions rising in the Middle East, particularly between the US and Iran, with the US President Donald Trump stating that he may be willing to use force and potentially not disregarding a strike on military facilities of Tehran. Additionally, the meeting of the EU Foreign Affairs Council comes following the inaugural meeting of the Board of Peace, that is the US President Donald Trump's initiative, a UN alternative for a potential peace agreement in the Gaza Strip. Now, the meeting in Washington, which took place on February 19th, was attended primarily by world leaders who are classified by international overseeing bodies, as undemocratic. Now, despite that fact, the EU states that it remains determined to maintain a dialogue with Washington on both Iran and the Board of Peace, and it is resigned to have a seat at the negotiating table.
Diplomacy must be given a chance, and we continue to believe that a sustainable solution to the Iran nuclear issue can only be achieved through negotiations.
To remind everyone also of what is it that we're doing very, very specifically on this matter, and again that we're not just paying as the biggest donor to Palestine, but also that we have a voice in this matter.
Additionally, the Foreign Affairs Council meeting will be taking place on the eve of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Now, we know that Ukraine will be on top of the agenda, particularly as the meeting will also be attended by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, that is Andriy Sybiha. We know that the EU's foreign reps are expected to primarily discuss the ongoing support and military aid for Ukraine. Since 2025, EU's role has become more prescient, particularly as it pertains to the closing of a strategic gap where Europeans had to raise their financial aid for Kiev by about 60% following the withdrawal of some of the military aid from the US.
We delivered with a total assistance of 170 billion euro package, making Europe by far the main donor and today almost the only source of military funding.
Now, apart from further military aid for Kiev, the bloc is also set to discuss further mechanisms in order to weaken Russia's war machine. That includes the imposition of additional sanctions. As has been underlined by Kaja Kallas, the EU's foreign policy chief, the bloc is expected to discuss the imposition of 20th package of sanctions, with her being determined to get it done on Monday. Now, we know that these sanctions will primarily target the Russian shadow fleet operating in the Baltic Sea, as well as its LNG and Arctic capabilities, and impose further restrictions on Moscow's banking sector. From Brussels for TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Polish Defence Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz hosted counterparts from France, Germany, Italy and the UK at the E5 format meeting. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas and NATO Deputy Secretary-General Radmila Shekerinska also attended. The agenda focuses on European and Euro-Atlantic defence, hybrid threats and Russia's war in Ukraine. Our correspondent Diana Skyer reports.
The slogan for this European Group of 5 defense ministers meeting was none other than "It is our task to deter any threat from Russia and protect all of Europe." And at the forefront was EU solidarity. Now, hosting the defense leaders of France, Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, as well as EU policy chief Kaja Kallas and NATO Deputy Secretary General Radmila Shekerinska, Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz said they all heard the voice coming from the USA.
For the first time in history, the European Union is spending so much money on armaments and interoperative capabilities for its national armies. We have interpreted the voices coming from across the ocean.
Now, many important points were discussed. Among them, the war in Ukraine, European and Euro-Atlantic defense, particularly highlighted, was aiming for a stronger, self-reliant Europe, one that is working on stepping up its defense capabilities. What was pledged?
The announcement that the 5 countries today made to develop low-cost air defenses to protect European skies is an example of taking responsibility.
The launch today of the LEAP initiative for low-cost effectors shows that E5 meetings deliver results.
And to show words mean action, Germany's Boris Pistorius already made a personal pledge.
Germany alone will provide €11.5 billion in direct military support to Ukraine this year.
Now, Russia's hybrid threat was also high on the agenda.
We have tightened controls of the movements of Russian diplomats. We have stepped up actions against Russia's shadow fleet, and we deployed hybrid response teams to partner countries at risk. All this goes together with more investments in drone and cyber defenses.
Now, the next E5 meeting will be held in Ankara by the summer, and we'll have to see until then whether promises have been put to action. For TVP World, I'm Diana Skaya in Kraków.
There was a lot to celebrate at Warsaw's Chopin Airport on Friday as the Polish airport authorities secured financing for a much-needed multi-million euro expansion. Konrad Golinski has the details.
This is Warsaw's Chopin Airport, and in 2025 it served over 24 million passengers. That's a 13% jump from the previous year, a rate of growth projected to continue for the foreseeable future. The problem, however, is that the site is already running at almost full capacity.
Today we are celebrating signing the agreement with the crucial Polish financial institution on 3.3 billion Polish zlotys. This 3.3 billion zlotys is really important for us because this is the fuel in our investments.
The agreement, signed with a consortium of banks, including Bank PKO, PKO, and BGK, provides 3.3 billion zloty, or about 800 million euro in financing for 2 strategic goals: expansion and modernization of the Warsaw Chopin Airport, located here, close to the city center. Additionally, the agreement earmarks capital investment here for Warsaw's major new aviation hub, Port Polska, which is already under construction. And this is where we come to one of the major elements of criticism. The multi-billion euro transportation center is set to open in 2032, and when it does, the demolition of Chopin Airport begins immediately. Now, the Chopin Airport isn't set to be completed until the summer of 2029. So, assuming both projects are finished on time, that leaves just 3 years for the expansion to pay off. The Airport Authority and the Ministry of Infrastructure assure the public that the expansion will yield positive outcomes, especially since doing nothing before Port Polska opens could shift passengers elsewhere and slow air traffic demand in Poland.
Today, the growth rate of air transport in Europe is about 4%. In Poland, it is 14.4%. We are the leader in passenger air transport growth across all of Europe. We cannot afford to miss this moment.
He may have a point. And even if the investment is not fully recouped, inaction could prove even more costly in the long run. The banks financing the project agree.
We are really proud that we participate in this investment project. And what is the most important for us is that the business plan is very strong.
Well, with financing secure, the process now moves into the execution phase. Contractors submitted their final bids on Friday, marking the next step in one of the largest aviation infrastructure programs currently underway in Central Europe. For TVP World, I'm Konrad Gorlinski.
Is big tech the new big tobacco? A landmark trial in California could reshape how social media companies are held accountable for harm done to children. Aisha Bachi reports.
Remember the tobacco trials?
The government will present evidence of a massive 50-year scheme to defraud the public, and in particular this afternoon, substantial evidence relating to the defendants' past and continuing efforts to market cigarettes to young people.
Those cases led to multi-billion-dollar settlements, strict advertising limits, and a permanent stain on big tobacco's reputation. Now, a similar question is surfacing in American courtrooms. Is big tech facing its own tobacco moment?
The intention of the company was to prey on teens, use teens' usage, exploit them so they can make greater profits. And that was done intentionally, not by accident.
More than 2,000 lawsuits are moving through U.S. courts accusing social media companies of designing addictive platforms that harm children. In California, a landmark case known as KGM versus Big Tech is underway. On Wednesday, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg testified for the first time. After heated questioning, he acknowledged overruling internal concerns from staff and outside experts about teen well-being, including lifting a ban on certain Instagram beauty filters. But critics argue that the problem runs deeper.
Then there is an advanced AI that is mining the data and processing them to actually provide the best possible outcome for the platform, which means to get you addicted on using it and exploit you as the customer to maximum possible degree.
Newly unsealed internal Meta documents suggest executives were aware of risks linked to youth addiction. The lawsuit targets not only Meta and its platforms Facebook and Instagram, but also Google's YouTube. Snapchat and TikTok agreed to settle before trial, and courts are not the only arena.
It's an initiative that makes a lot of sense in Australia and one that we should bring here to save the next generation.
Governments are stepping in. Australia passed a ban on social media access for children under 16. Others are following.
In France, we are embarking on a process to ban social networks for children under 15 years old.
In Poland, the debate is also gaining momentum.
We follow Australia's example. That means we expect big tech companies not to allow children access to harmful content that is available on their platforms, essentially any content, unless they choose to verify it.
The question now is whether big tech will face consequences comparable to big tobacco, and whether this moment brings structural change or simply reputational damage. For TVP World, I'm Aisha Badge.
Joining us now is Daniel Fried. He's former U.S. ambassador to Poland, to discuss the growing possibility of a U.S. military strike on Iran and the evolving balance of power in Ukraine as it defends against a Russian aggression. Ambassador Fried, welcome to the programme. Thank you for taking the time.
Good evening.
Good evening to you. So before we move on to those topics, I just wanted to get your view on the Supreme Court decision on the authority of President Trump to impose those global tariffs. What impact do you think that this striking down of that decision is going to have on President Trump's economic policy?
President Trump will still have authorities to impose tariffs. But what the Supreme Court struck down was essentially Trump's authority to impose any tariff on any country at any time for any reason. The existing authorities that Trump can now use are more specific. They're either time limited or require specific findings of specific harms to which tariffs are a remedy. In other words, Trump can no longer use tariffs as a weapon of choice at his will, which an authority he apparently never had and certainly was abusing. So it is a defeat for Trump, and it was one that was foreseeable. Using the statute for sanctions to impose tariff was always questionable, and the Supreme Court decision was strong.
Understood, but it's good news for small businesses as well, is it not? Because they'll be getting some refunds on the tariff deposits that they've paid, which will help a lot of these small businesses get out of a hole. That's true, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure what the administration's plans are to repay the money collected. That's going to be a long process, and I suspect the administration will slow it down and complicate it. The problem with the administration's use of tariffs is that it was so capricious and so unpredictable that it was hard for businesses to plan. Tariffs against Brazil for political reasons, tariffs against China, tariffs rescinded against China, no tariffs against Russia. It was all over the map. Businesses like certainty. And perhaps now, when all the shouting and arm waving is done, the administration will have a more consistent and predictable tariff policy because it will be limited by specific laws. At least I hope so.
Understood. I'd like to move on now, Mr. Ambassador, to Iran. A big military build-up in the region. President Trump is saying, well, they've got 10 to 15 days in which to come to an agreement, or there will be some bad outcomes, and negotiations are going on. How likely is it, do you think, that the US will strike Iran?
There is a significant chance, certainly. Look, last June, the United States did attack Iranian nuclear sites. Trump said that those attacks were so successful that the Iranian nuclear program was obliterated. His words, obliterated. Turns out that's not true, as many critics suggested. The problem is, do you go after the nuclear facilities? If so, what are the odds of success? Do you go more broadly? What are the consequences? It is easier to start a war than to end it. But the Trump administration attacked Iran back in June, and Iran did not significantly retaliate. So there is some room for the administration to put pressure on Iran, and it is doing so in the service, it says, of a negotiated settlement on Iran's nuclear program. So there is a chance that this could actually work out. There is also a chance, I'm afraid, of escalation, and the Trump administration has not decided what it's going to do. Right now, we are in a phase of what I would call coercive diplomacy, pressure tactics to force Iran to make a deal.
Understood, but this time it's slightly different, isn't it, Ambassador? Because this time, I mean, President Trump has not made a secret of the fact that he wants regime change in Iran. So we've got the mullahs and we've got the IRGC with their backs against the wall. And if President Trump does order a strike, then what's the danger that Tehran is going to retaliate, perhaps through the use of its proxies, attack American assets in the region and further afield?
The odds are high that Iran will indeed attempt to retaliate. Whether they succeed, I can't say, but this is an obvious response by them. But it's not as clear to me that Trump wants regime change. He chose not to go for regime change in Venezuela. The Trump administration is divided, of course. It's a very loose coalition of competing elements. Some of them are in favor of regime change, others are not. And Trump himself keeps calling on Iran to make a deal. He's not calling for regime change. Of course, you're right that others have called for regime change, but it may be that Trump is threatening regime change but will settle for a nuclear deal.
Understood. Now, how do you think the Arab countries surrounding Iran are likely to react? Because it's surely not in their interest for Iran to have nuclear weapons, is it?
The Arab countries have wanted the U.S. to take Iran down a notch for some time, and they want the U.S. to take the risks for taking Iran down a notch. They're not going to be sympathetic to the Iranian regime, but they're not going to want to stand in the way. The U.S. is going to have to assume the risks. And this is a tough one for Trump. He likes quick, decisive military campaigns. He could yet get one, but with military action, there is the danger of unforeseen consequences.
Indeed, there often is in this sort of situation. Now, I'd like to move on to another topic. In a recent interview on TVP World's On the Record, Finnish Prime Minister Stubb spoke about the situation in Ukraine. Let's hear what he had to say.
We need to negotiate a peace agreement and stop this war. I think President Trump is correct on that. But now I think most of the cards are actually with Ukraine. Look, this war has been a strategic failure for Putin. He wanted to make Ukraine Russian, it became European. He wanted to stop NATO from enlarging, he got Finland and Sweden. And he wanted to keep European defense expenditure down, we're going up to 5%. Militarily, he's losing on the battlefront. He's not advancing, and when he advances, Ukraine advances somewhere else. So this has been a military disaster for Russia. And thirdly, his economy is doing badly.
Right. Well, what do you make of that, Mr. Ambassador? Because he's saying, you know, Russia's not doing very well, but he also said later on in that interview that Ukraine is holding a stronger hand. Would you agree?
President Stubb is a wise man, and I usually find myself in agreement with him. I mostly am here too, but I would say this. Putin still thinks he can win because he thinks there's a possibility that the United States will abandon Ukraine or that Europe will break in the face of Russian pressure. However, Stubb is right that Ukraine has held off the Russians and Putin has not succeeded. Let's back up. It's 4 years of the war. That's longer than the war between Stalin and Hitler, 1941 to 1945. It's almost as long as World War I. This is a big war for Russia, and big wars can have big consequences. If Russia loses, Putinism will be discredited, and it could be in danger. We have an opportunity to succeed, to help Ukraine and help ourselves and help the free world. And I hope we do. I think President Stubb is of a similar mind, though I won't speak for him. The problem is and this is mainly on the United States, we are not using all the assets available. We have tools. To put it bluntly, we have some clubs lying on the table. We should pick them up and use them. Additional sanctions, going after the Russian Ghost Fleet, additional weapons for Ukraine, and a clear message that I hope would come finally from Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin. Enough stalling, do the deal, a ceasefire in place, security for Ukraine, or we are coming after, and we have the power to make that stick.
Indeed, a strong message indeed. So. Ambassador, unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there, but thank you very much indeed for taking the time.
Thanks
have a good day.
Me.
Bye-bye now. Right, so please stay with us for World Brief. That's coming right up. But from me, that's all for the moment. Goodbye.